Hi everybody, I am going to talk a little bit about John Dewey. I have selected him to write about for my philosophical model analysis paper, and as you can see I've labeled him an unlikely hero for a Christian. The things that people know about him that would make that an unlikely hero are that he has some socialist leanings, and that after careful study of Charles Darwin and the origin of species, he pretty much pronounced himself to be an atheist. Background on John Dewey. So John Dewey was born in Vermont about 2 years before the breakout of the Civil War. So it's 1859. The family had 4 sons in total. They had been living on a farm. Burlington, Vermont was sort of exploding with industry. We're talking about the Industrial Revolution, factories, all of the farm goods being put together and shipped out from these factories in the city. Railroads are being built, and so with that comes a bunch of immigrants from places in Europe and from Canada, and so the Deweys have 4 sons. The oldest son, John, the first John, actually died tragically. So first at age 2 he falls into a pot of boiling water, and they grab him out of the water and they're wrapping him with oil and bandages, and the bandages catch fire and the boy dies a very tragic, painful death. Some 3 years later, Mom is expecting again, has another baby, and that is this John Dewey. And so he always sort of was called and felt like he was the replacement child, sort of like the John 2.0. This John, however, showed himself to be pretty academically gifted. And so here he is in this family. They're active in their church. The mom is really dedicated to social service and helping others. And along comes John, and he's really smart. And so it's pretty much decided that he's going to go to the university, and he does so at age 15. So he gets admitted to the University of Vermont at age 15. And after he graduates, he decides he wants to teach. He teaches high school, he teaches elementary school. He decides he's an academic in nature, and so he gets his PhD at Johns Hopkins. He opens his own sort of experimental school where he can try out all of these different theories of education and see what kind of works for him. As John Dewey is developing his own philosophy of education, we are in a time where education, school, was pretty much stand and deliver. So the teacher's at the front of the room, the students enter, they are ready for action, sort of in a very soldier-like fashion. Take out your notebooks, listen to what I say, write it down, memorize it. I will test you or quiz you on your ability to remember said facts, and then next week we'll do the same thing. So that was sort of the stand and deliver method, and unfortunately we do see that sometimes still today. But that was what education was. Add to that a set curriculum of basic skills and the ability to read and recite the Bible. That's the context of public education that John Dewey found himself in. He sort of revolutionized that, not single-handedly, but I did choose him because of his leaning toward pragmatism, toward hands-on learning, experience, scientific method. He said that reality is perceived and developed by each person. My reality could be different from your reality. It's all about the experience that we bring with us, the perceptions that we have, and for John Dewey, the conversations that we are able to conduct in a social environment, in a democratic way, and by doing so, maybe we can even unravel some stereotypes, some preconceived notions, racism, classism, all of these things. We could sort of leave them at the door if we could just take a humanistic view and see that each individual has value, brings something to the table, offers help in solving this collective problem that we have. So how do the ideas of John Dewey from the turn of the century to now have implications for our classrooms? Now when we step into classrooms, yes, we still see some very boring teachers doing some really traditional things that are not effective. But by and large, we see collaborative learning activities where students are sort of huddled around a common problem, and they're using common tools to navigate their way through it and having academic discourse and conversation. Students are thinking about their own thinking, and so They're having higher order thinking questions. They're being asked to reflect on why they came to a certain result. They're being asked to share that thinking with their classmates in an effort to be reflective about their own process and see what maybe they might add or take away from that. In terms of preparing teachers for the classroom, John Dewey said, theory is great, but practice is far more important. And so we have teacher practicums and student teaching where a candidate must go out and experience a real-life classroom environment in order to really get a feel for an understanding of their own methods of teaching and being in a classroom. Authentic assessments also sort of branched out from the thinking of John Dewey in that we can assess a student's skill set and knowledge through some kind of performance task or by a test or by writing or by explaining, all of these things that really authenticate the depth to which a student is familiar with a topic or can perform some skill. In terms of diversity, John Dewey is someone who saw the classroom as a social place of democracy and democratic thinking where all voices should be heard. And so he believed in a pluralistic society in terms of race, culture, religion, all of those things. So what's the verdict on John Dewey? I think he was a philosopher and a thinker who had some really valuable ideas that contributed to education and continue to do so. I think he also was a human who had some pretty messed up parts of his life that sort of affected who he was. I'm not sure at which exact point he left the church or left being a Christian. I will say that he went on to get married and have 6 children, and 2 of them suffered tragic deaths. And I sort of feel sorry that he never did come back to the church and come back to Christ and sort of reconcile that. I think it probably had a large effect on who he was as a person and maybe his loss of faith. So in that sense, I have some sympathy for him and greatly appreciate those parts of him that he contributed to the field of education. Politics and religion, not so much.